Hi, I'm Michael. I'm the managing partner at Greenbush Financial Group. So June continues to be a great month for the PPP Loan Program. The SBA keeps rolling out additional changes that are really favorable for small businesses. So at the start of the month, on June 5th, the Congress passed the PPP Flexibility Act, which extended that 8-week covered period to a 24-week covered period, giving employers more time to spend the money. In addition, within that act, it increased the amount of non-payroll costs that could be used from 25% to 40% of the loan amount and still get full forgiveness. And for the ability to rehire employees, the safe harbor date used to be June 30th, and then they opened that all the way up to December 31st for rehiring and restoring wages. Now, in addition to that, on June 17th, the SBA rolled out their new PPP Forgiveness Application, which thankfully was a lot easier and more straightforward than the big 12-page application that they released back in May. And even better is they have two versions of the form. They've got an easy application and kind of a long form application. A lot of companies are most likely going to be able to apply under this EZ, which essentially is one page and very simple. So most companies may be able to complete this application in under 20 minutes, which is a great thing. And on June 22nd, which was yesterday, the SBA also announced favorably that companies can apply for forgiveness before the end of their covered period. And this was big because with a 24-week covered period, it was putting companies in an odd position that, okay, I just needed an extra few weeks to spend my loan, but 24 weeks is a ways. Do I have to keep people employed? Do I have to keep wages at their current levels? Otherwise, I could face reduction. So with this opening it up to saying you can apply as soon as you have spent your full PPP loan amount, that's big for companies going forward. In this video, we're going to go through how to complete that new PPP loan forgiveness application, as well as who qualifies to submit that easy, shorter version of the form, because not everyone qualifies to submit it. You have to meet certain criteria in order to get kind of that easier version of the form. In addition to that, when they came out with this forgiveness application, they also defined the new comp limits for owner employees and employees for that 24-week covered period, which is different than that $15,385 limit that was under the old rules. Again, two versions of the form. You got the Forgiveness Application EZ, which is Form 3508 EZ, and then you have the long version of the form, which is Form 3508. Now, this EZ application made a ton of sense to us because under the old rules, when there was only an 8-week covered period, companies were really struggling to spend that 10 weeks worth of payroll in an 8-week period. But now that they've extended it to 24 weeks, a lot of companies are going to have no problem spending 10 weeks worth of payroll on 24 weeks. So why not make the forgiveness application easier and saying, look, I got a $100,000 PPP loan. I easily spent $100,000 over that 24-week period. Let's just make this easy and call the forgiveness a day. And that's essentially what's happened. Now I'm going to cover who is eligible to submit this EZ forgiveness application. They put forth 3 pieces of criteria, and you only have to satisfy one of the 3 to be eligible to submit this shorter EZ form. So I'm going to give you kind of the consolidated simplified version, but the longer definitions of these criteria are listed at our website. So the first one is you have no employees, which essentially means you're a sole proprietor or owner-only entity. If that's the case, you can automatically submit the EZ forgiveness application. Number 2, you did not reduce employee headcount, your FTEs, and did not reduce wages by more than 25% for employees making less than $100,000 in 2019 during the covered period compared to January 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2020. So essentially, if you didn't lay off any employees or really reduce wages, then you can use this EZ application. Number 3, you did not reduce employee wages by more than 25% for employees making less than $100,000 in 2019, but you reduced the number of FTEs during the covered period. However, the reduction in the FTEs was because the CDC, OSHA, or other government agency limited the capacity that your business could operate at during the covered period. So an example of that third criteria is if I own a restaurant in New York State and New York has told me, hey, you can only operate at 50% of capacity due to these kind of safety restrictions, I can make the case that the reason why I didn't bring all my employees back is I actually couldn't because of these safety restrictions. I do want to spend a minute talking about this wage reduction in these employees in 2019 that made under $100,000. So while on the surface that seems fairly easy and straightforward, I would just take my year-end payroll report for 2019, find all the employees that made $100,000 or less, and then say I got to look at them during the covered period to see if I reduce their wages by more than 25%. That's not necessarily how that calculation is being applied. So it's really an annualized calculation. So they're looking at it almost per pay period, that if any employee made more than $100,000 on a per pay period annualized basis, they are not included in that annual wage reduction. So here's an example. So if I take $100,000 and let's say I'm on a bi-weekly payroll schedule, that makes it about $3,800 per pay period. Instead of just looking at the end year wages, I'm actually looking at all those employees per pay period to say, did anyone make over $3,800 in any single pay period in 2019? If they did, then they are not included in this wage reduction and I can ignore them for that. So if I have an employee, Jim, who made $80,000 in 2019, but I issued Jim a bonus in the last payroll of December and his comp was $5,000 that pay period, he does not count towards that wage reduction. So I may still be able to use the EZ form even if I reduce Jim's wages during the covered period. Who knows if that's how the SBA wanted that limit actually applied, but for most of the professionals that we've spoken to, that's how they're applying those limits. So with that, let's go ahead and jump to how we complete this PPP EZ forgiveness application. So this is what the PPP EZ forgiveness application looks like on the first page. So the top section of the form is really just general information about your business. You have to enter all the information about your PPP loan amount. If you ended up getting an EIDL loan, so that other SBA loan program that get forwarded the cash grants, you have to enter that amount also on this loan application. In the middle section, you see payroll schedule. You have to indicate what your payroll schedule is. And then finally, we jump down to kind of this covered period. So the covered period begins on the date that the money hits your bank account for the PPP loan. And you have the option, if your PPP loan was issued before June 5th, you have the option to either select a 8-week covered period or a 24-week covered period. The natural question we've received is, why would a company elect an 8-week covered period versus a 24-week covered period if they have more time to work with? Well, some companies have already spent all the PPP money within that 8-week period. They know they didn't have a reduction in employee headcount, didn't have a reduction in employee wages, so they've kind of locked in their full forgiveness amount. Now, for companies that are, let's say, 50 to 60% through their PPP loan amount, going 24 weeks has raised some additional questions because they realize by going out further, I will have fully spent this money at probably 15 or 16 weeks. What if I have to get rid of employees at week 20? Is that going to hurt my forgiveness amount because I've reduced my headcount during the covered period? So in the fact that they just came out and said you can apply for forgiveness early, they did not clarify that that forgiveness date that you submit the application, does that 15-week period now become your actual covered period and you ignore the other weeks, or you apply, but if you get rid of employees before the end of the 24-week period, that headcount reduction could come back to still haunt you. So we really do not know the answer to that question at this point. What the SBA has essentially done is it's kind of forced these companies that have not spent all their PPP money within that 8-week period into kind of this wait and see mode, that even though they know now they can submit for forgiveness early, how are they going to really assess those employee calculations that could potentially go out 24 weeks so they can do the pros and cons between 8 weeks versus 24 weeks versus maybe the covered period is just from the time you got the loan to the time you submitted the application. It's all kind of up in the air now. But there are some advantages to some of these longer covered periods because the 8-week covered period had those employee and owner comp caps at a lower amount, or if you extend it out, those comp caps get increased, and we'll address that later on during the application. The next line down is this alternative payroll covered period. So instead of starting the covered period on the date you receive the PPP loan, you can voluntarily elect to start your covered period on the first payroll date following the receipt of your PPP loan. So if I received my PPP loan on April 26th, but the first payroll date for my company wasn't until May 5th, technically I could start my covered period on May 5th instead of that earlier date. Now with a 24-week extended cover period, this might end up being irrelevant for a lot of companies. Before, they were trying to really cram, all the pay periods they could into that 8-week covered period, where now with 24 weeks based on 10 weeks of payroll, companies might not have to worry about that alternative payroll. All right, let's jump down to line 1, which is the payroll cost. So with this new PPP forgiveness application came different compensation limits that if companies elected that 24-week covered period. Now, under the old 8-week covered period, the comp limit was the same for both owners and employees at that $15,385. But under this new 24-week covered period, they made different comp limits for owner employees and regular employees. Let's start with the owners. So the owners, the old comp cap was at $15,385. They moved that up to $20,833 as a comp cap. Now they have that same restriction in place as they did before, which is the lesser of $20,833 or 2.5 months of compensation from 2019. So it's still that lower of the two. If you are a sole proprietor and you made more than $100,000 in 2019 and you're electing that 24-week covered period, you can go ahead and enter $20,833 on that line and just continue on. Same thing for owner-only entities. Take all the owners, assess the comp caps, total them up, put it on that line, and continue to move on through the rest of the application. On the other side, companies that have employees, there's no worksheets to complete. If you qualify to complete the EZ application, you can create your own Excel file, and I'm going to show you how to total up the payroll cost for your company. Column 1 of your Excel spreadsheet is really going to be the owner comp and the employee comp, and you're going to implement that $20,833 cap for the owners, and then the employees are going to have a cap comp of $46,154 if you've elected that 24-week covered period, which makes sense. It's similar to the math that they had under the 8-week covered period, that you take $100,000 cap comp, you divide it by 52 weeks, times that by 24 weeks, and that's how you get to that $46,000 and change. Now, the ability to file the forgiveness application before the end of your 24-week covered period, my guess is at some point they're going to alter or revise those comp caps to really reflect the number of weeks that are from the time you got the loan to the time you actually submitted the forgiveness application. Because if you submit the forgiveness application after 15 weeks, why would they give you 24 weeks worth of comp for your employees to apply towards a forgiveness amount? Since we don't have the answer for that question yet, and we'll probably get it at some point during guidance, probably safer to just take that 100,000 divided by your number of pay periods and keep tracking it per pay period. So if you do apply for forgiveness early, you're doing it based on the exact amount that's been paid based on that $100,000 cap for your employees. Okay, so that's the pure compensation column, but for your employees, you're also able to add in employer contributions for employee health insurance and employer contributions to employee retirement plans in addition to those comp limits that we just discussed. So you'll need separate columns for those two to determine how much you've paid for that. Now, for sole proprietors and partners, it seems pretty clear that those are not an addition to that $20,833 cap. It can't be added up on top. Now, for S Corp and C Corp owner employees, it seems like health insurance is out, but it's gray on the retirement contributions at this point. But if I had to guess, my guess is for all owner employees, when all the guidance comes out, it may be capped at that $20,833 for all owner employees, regardless of entity type. Now we can move on to line 2, which is business mortgage interest. So that's any interest payments on a covered mortgage obligation that was in place prior to February 15, 2020. And as of right now, that definition is either paid or incurred during the covered period. You move to line 3. Line 3 is rent or lease payments. Those are payments of rent during the covered period for a lease that was in place prior to February 15, 2020. And similar to the mortgage interest, it's either paid or incurred during the covered period. The last one, line 4, that's business utility payments. So that's payment of utilities during the covered period, which includes electric, gas, water, transportation, telephone, and internet service that was in place prior to February 15, 2020. The rest of the application, lines 5 through 8, you're basically totaling up all your costs, you're comparing it to your loan amount and determining what percentage of your loan is forgiven. The second page of the EZ application looks like this, and what you see is it's just a number of certification that the borrower's making, that they followed all the rules, that all the information is accurate, and they sign and date the bottom of this form. The next step is really to compile the documentation that supports those expenses that you've listed on the PPP forgiveness application, and then submit all of that to your bank. Your bank, after receiving that application, has 60 days to either approve or reject your forgiveness amount, and then you're done. If you found during this that you don't qualify for the EZ application and it's more of the long form, we are going to create a separate video on the long form since there's more calculations involved. So just subscribe and we'll get that out to you shortly. And we'll of course update you with any additional guidance we get from the SBA. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.